Okay, welcome back, everyone. So I'm sure most of you are probably not here for the first time, so you probably already know this, but I'll explain the rules because it's always fun. So we have a group of people here, Henrik, Simon, Mathieu, Gabriel, and Jasper, I think are representing quite a wide variety of different experiences from the Haskell community and various topics. So, I mean, for example, we have like Simon and Henrik having sort of experience in teaching Haskell at universities. Henrik is a member of the Haskell 2020 committee. We have Jasper and Gabriel and Mathieu more representing the commercial side of things. Jasper is also a member of the Haskell org committee. So there's a wide variety of potential questions you might be willing to ask. So you can ask questions. Any vaguely Haskell-related topic is admissible, although, of course, we cannot guarantee that we'll not refuse to answer certain questions. But so generally, you can just ask questions. But so there's this one rule that if you don't actually ask a question but voice an opinion or make a statement, then you thereby earn a spot on this panel, and somebody else will rotate out for you. And I will make the decision on what constitutes an opinion or not. So that if you want to get on the panel, it's very easy. If you want to get off the panel, you have to make very provocative statements in order to in order to try to get lots of opinions being voiced. And in order to start, I want to hand over to Jasper, who wants to make a short announcement, and hopefully that will lead to the first few questions.
Yeah. So thanks for giving me the chance to make a short announcement. So with Haskell.org, we organized this program called Summer of Haskell, in which we find companies to sponsor. And then with this money, we pay students to work on open source Haskell infrastructure. One of the things we want to try and do better next year is before the program starts, we want to have a really nice list of suggestions of things that students can possibly work on. So if you have sort of any ideas of where we should be able to improve the compiler, the libraries, the ecosystem, please contribute this idea. You can find our contact info at summer.haskell.org. This would be very valuable. And maybe with this, I can also sort of give a good start to the discussion. Where do you guys think we should be? We should start improving the Haskell ecosystem the most?
Smooth move, Jasper.
Okay. Do we have questions? Or, I mean, it can be about something, or opinions. Or it can also be about something else, of course. Perhaps we have even answers from within the panel, so I don't know.
Yeah, I already mentioned. Is this on? Okay. I already mentioned Liquid Haskell this morning. I don't know if it would be a suitable project for a beginning Haskell programmer, but I know that compile times are a big issue for many people. If there was a project that could yield dividends there, improving compile times, I think that would be something worth working on.
So compile times are a big problem for us as well, and one problem is that Cabal packages don't really separate interface from implementation, so we can't build them in parallel. It seems that a lot of the support is kind of there in GHC already with HI files and so on, but we basically had to abandon them, and so we could do proper fast parallel builds. And with Backpack coming down the line, it seems that there's some sort of hope to have a package with proper interface and implementation separation, but obviously the build tools will need to exploit this, and I'm not sure if that's really been thought of. And so this is one way that I think we can really improve build times, to be able to build packages.
I think I was very sneaky by Jasper, but I don't hear any question mark at the end. So,
so the question.
So you can all already come forward, please. Now we've scared everyone. Yeah.
Since compiler, well, that's to continue your reasoning. Since the compiler determines the interfaces currently by scanning the project, by deducing the types and so on, couldn't we make a first pass where it would go over all packages, deduce the interfaces, and then compile them in parallel using those interfaces? But the first scan would be faster and just to determine the interface.
Nice job making that a question. So actually, I would like to first see some evidence that the average branching factor is high enough that we would get a significant speed up in parallelism. So even without this, we had done some tests back when we were enabling parallel builds, both within packages and also parallel across the package. So intra-package parallelism and inter-package parallelism. And we tried throwing like various amounts of cores at the problem, and we never got a significant speed up past 8 cores when trying to build very large projects like ESOT or Lens in the Haskell ecosystem. So I'd like to see like some evidence that the branching factor would be high enough if we were to implement this to actually get significant speed up gains.
Doesn't Lens depend on many other packages?
It does, but even when we like threw lots of cores at it, we didn't see a benefit past 8.
But are you building that? Are you building those as one big?
No, we were
office?
We were building them. If dependencies were independent, they'd be built in parallel, if possible.
But then you have to build the entire package before you can build its dependency. That's the way it works at the moment. Yeah. So to really test the speed up, you'd have to take all the code out, all the transitive dependencies, put them all in one big blob, and then let GHC build the whole lot to do a proper parallel build. Because at the moment, the entire package has to be built before any of its dependents can be built.
So you're saying that if the dependency graph was more granular, you'd be able to take advantage of parallelism?
Well, there's an interface. If packages separated interface and implementation, then you could build the dependents just on an interface.
I think he wants to try.
Yeah, I know. I think there's also more even. Yeah, but
It sounds like a great summer of code project just to try it out.
So another project idea that was discussed and that didn't make it into this cut this year for Haskell Summer of Code was to work on performance profiling tools, and in particular to try to leverage or to continue the line of work that's been where there's a lot of time that's been spent by Ben Gamari in particular, and I think Peter Wortman back in the day on trying to support basically profiling, doing performance profiling of Haskell applications using standard Linux tools such as the Linux perf framework, and there are plenty of others. And to enable that, a key is to generate good debug information and include that in binaries. I'm not exactly sure where that is at this point in time, but I guess a question to you all is how, what kind of demands do you guys have around performance profiling, and what would you like to see in this space?
okay. Yeah. So.
I had a question.
Yes.
I had a question. All right, now it's working. So I had a question. Can we still achieve good performance with Haskell if we do separate compilation? Because we really don't we depend on inlining to get our performance? So don't we need to build everything sequentially so we can have nice inlining? So I'm trying to phrase this as a question. So
Yeah, it sounds to me like you're. It sounds to me like you're stating an opinion as a question. So. Which nevertheless means that you should get an answer. But so if you want to answer, then stay. Oh. If you want to, otherwise you can swap. Yeah. So do we have an answer for? Christian?
What was the question again?
So the question was, can we get? So, okay, my thought was that we can't have too much parallel builds because, as we saw on this talk here earlier by Matthew Pickering, GHC really depends on inlining, and so we need all the interface files so we can properly inline to get significant speed up. So I think there's, to get fast builds, we probably need things to build in parallel, to build sequentially, maybe.
We need less of optimization, perhaps.
Maybe.
Okay.
So
Yeah, but nevertheless.
I guess that's true, and certainly our compilation strategy is different from say other compilers. But this is something that, for example, GCC has grappled with as they introduced things like link time optimization and so on. There's, for example, the linker phase that starts becoming less parallel for the same reason.
So GHC already has these HI files, these bootstrap, that's used, I believe, to bootstrap the compiler as well. So it's possible that it's about what changes, because we all want to do incremental builds. So it's possible that an HI file doesn't change because no one's changed any of the functions that are inlined. Mm-hmm. So the point is, if you make a small change in a package, you don't really want to build the entire package again. It may well be that there's no change to this HI file, and so you don't then have to build any of its dependents again. So I think we can definitely be smarter, and it seems that the underlying mechanisms are sort of already there.
Okay.
Hi. So my question is, it seems to me that in the Haskell community, there's, for several domains, there's many solutions that you could use. For instance, in FRP, there's like 10, 15 libraries that you could go for, and also for XML parsing and for all kinds of things. There's too many choices, and it's really hard to make an informed choice when you're approaching a problem and choose a library that's the one that you need to use. And maybe it doesn't mean anything. Maybe it just means that people are working on their own things. But to me, it seems that maybe it means that we're not agreeing and we're not encouraged to collaborate on other people's libraries. Do you think this is a problem? And do you think we should do anything about it?
I think that qualifies as well. You make it hard for me not to invite you up here. So.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting if we look at other language communities. So I do some work in Erlang, and Erlang has been around since what, the late 1980s, and has got, has gradually grown over that period, and it's used quite a lot. And about 5 years ago, this guy Jose Velin came along and defined a language called Elixir on top of Erlang. I mean, it uses the same virtual machine. It looks like Ruby rather than Erlang, and people say that's very nice. And it's had a huge uptake. I mean, its acceleration is much higher than Erlang's acceleration. And some people say it's to do with the concrete syntax, but I don't believe that. I think at least my observation is it's at a much earlier stage of community development. So there is one web server, there is one build and deploy system, and that means if somebody comes along and wants to do something, they contribute to the web server or the build and deploy system. So it's at a stage in its development which is very convergent. I'm not sure it'll stay like that, but it is interesting to observe that. Whereas Erlang has 10 web frameworks, none of which is ideal. Elixir has one, namely Phoenix, and that's the one that people use.
Do you have your own interpretation of how to translate the statement to Haskell, or?
Build a new language.
on top of GHC core, or?
Or something like Elm is doing. Elm is doing something like that.
Okay.
Isn't it the killer application? Ruby had Rails, and that's what drove its adoption, and the sales and marketing around it was superb. And
Yeah, that's true, but Elixir hasn't got a killer app in the same way.
Not
but
Phoenix?
Well, perhaps. But it's just it looks cool and it's easy to use.
Sounds marketing.
It's partly market, but it is easier to use. I mean, it's documentation is better. You know, there's a number of things, and I think that's due. And I don't want to overemphasize this, but I think it's due to it being smaller, it being more convergent, and I think that makes a difference. I don't know how one can quantify it. I'm not sure I can provide conclusive evidence to that effect, but that looks like the difference.
If you're looking for the elixir of Haskell, and it goes back to the original point, the PureScript compiler's always looking for contributors. For those that don't know, it's a lot like Haskell, except we have row types and records don't suck.
That doesn't sound like a question.
You can advertise PureScript from up here.
So my question is, how much do you all agree with me that...
Yeah. Right, I go. Shameless advertising.
So PureScript solves all problems?
All of them. No, not all of them. A few things are missing. Extensions, GADTs are the thing that I think a lot of people care about. But if we're talking about what Elixir has done for Erlang, I think you see a lot of that coming across in the PureScript community as definitely being a bit more, I don't want to say alive, but more seems to be happening. People get excited about PureScript and get excited about Elm in a way I don't think they do about Haskell at the moment. And I don't know whether that's just because Haskell's been around a long time, but it definitely seems like...
Right, I mean, okay, independently of how much enthusiasm there is for Haskell or not, one thing that I would think is different is that I haven't heard PureScript being marketed as a replacement for Haskell until now. Is this something that you would say?
I'm in no position to comment. I have no official affiliation. But if at some point GHC wants to just pull the PureScript compiler in as upstream...
Maybe we just need a new Haskell standard with a whizzy name. HaskellX, Haskell 2.0. I don't.
Maybe that's it. Maybe something that really conveys it as a scripting language that is very pure in its execution.
So I understood there's someone here from Haskell 2020 committee sitting there. So maybe that person has an opinion about where Haskell should go by 2020 already.
So the observation is that Haskell 2020 isn't sexy enough. Is that what people are saying? So 2020 is not sexy enough. Is that the problem?
It's not quite. Like the word elixir.
Point taken.
Okay, so we all need new names.
Yeah.
But there's also
GDTs were mentioned, and certainly I think the view of the Haskell 2020 committee, if you can still call it that, is that we want to consolidate the extensions that really are used a lot. And up until now, for example, GDTs have been a bit tricky because they haven't been as well understood as one would hope. But now there is actually new hope. There was a recent ICFP paper on exactly that. So so GDTs, multi-parameter type classes, some kind of functional dependencies or whatever. I think that's the top of the priority list.
Okay. Yeah, I see lots of questions now, but I don't know where the microphone is. So okay.
What can we as a community and your representatives there do about the, I have to say, glaring lack of diversity in the Haskell community? I mean, so some communities are doing stuff like Closure, for example, does something, and certainly they push that forward. So, what can we do in Haskell?
The word glaring is very close, but I'll let this go for for the time being. So.
I don't think it's news to anyone. I think as a community we have a very apparent problem that it's quite elitist in its presentation is Haskell. And there are some wonderful people, I know Julie's somewhere, who are doing great things to kind of break down that wall and say, actually, it's more accessible than I think people think, and you don't have to be a category theorist. And I think that helps a lot. Obviously, we're a bunch of white dudes on stage. Like, what do we know about diversity? But to me, it feels like making it feel less of an academic elite in a circle thing is going to help a lot with that.
So I've got a Haskell 2020 question. Should we get rid of the foldable instance for pairs from the standard library?
Yes.
And the secondary question is, does anybody actually use it for something useful?
That's the first question was okay. But the word, no, sorry, Graham, but the word useful. No, just, you were already really close last year.
I'd like someone to answer it, though.
Yes, by all means.
The answer is yes, by the way.
I mean, Henry can still answer it. I won't demand that you come up immediately again unless you want to, but you can still answer.
My personal opinion is yes, but it's of course more complicated.
But does anybody actually use it for something useful?
People claim so, yes.
Yes, Edward is using it.
I chose my words very carefully.
Quote, he's going to fight you to death over it. So there is one person at least, yes.
Okay. What's he using it for?
Lens.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, but that's a good use case.
That was a question.
I'm wondering
maybe?
whether, I mean, you're of the opinion that Edward is using it, right?
Well, he told me.
Right. Yeah, we're...
Okay, to just continue the question. I'm not sure this is such an issue, to be honest. Like, sometimes I feel like when people discuss this, it feels like we don't have bigger problems, because I don't remember any beginner going like, oh God, this is confusing me so much. I'm gonna stop learning Haskell and I'll do Node.js instead. But they're like, okay, I guess maybe this is useful and quirky. I'll just, accept it. And like, I don't think this broke the neck of any beginner. And I guess when I'm teaching my beginner's course and I do things like type of length, for example, is really embarrassing right now. And then I just say, well, this
should revert that.
This traversable or foldable constraint, just ignore it. Just say T is a list, and that's it. And people just, I mean, it's not like Haskell is the only quirky language, and lots of other languages have problems like these. And I don't think people see this and they hate it, and because of that, I don't think that's the final straw for anyone.
Does anyone here on the panel like the foldable traversable proposal? The one that's implemented in GHC? I don't.
I don't either.
So I think the original, whole Reddit poll and mailing list was kind of biased towards people who read mailing lists and go on Reddit. I don't know what other people think of that, but since there's silence, I think everyone's agreeing, right?
I think this is difficult to break these things down to votes, but I think one aspect which I feel is there is a certain amount of tension, more generally than this particular instance, is that what is the purpose of a type system, or what is the primary purpose of a type system? And I think classically, I think it's very clear it's kind of catch mistakes, right? And that is still what very many people are seeing it for. But then with Haskell, it's becoming so powerful, and in particular with type classes, that people are also seeing it as a way to essentially generate lots of code for me for free. by building instances, right? And instance search is very powerful. Instance search is essentially constructing terms on the fly. So that's for some people, I feel, becoming an almost as important aspect of the type system as this original catching mistakes. But these two goals seem to be contradictory to a certain extent, because if you add instances for everything possible, right, you don't ever get any type errors anymore. If you don't, then you don't get as much code generated for you as you might want. So perhaps we can get more opinions on how this tension can be resolved from the audience. Yeah, Nick, for example. Do you want to come up here?
You're assuming I'm expressing an opinion, so I do have an opinion, which is I don't agree that beginners looking at Haskell have an easy time with foldable. So when I teach my first years in the first term, in their first week of university, that length has typed foldable T implies TA to int, they look at me funny. Whereas when I used to tell them that it was typed list data int, they had some chance of getting away with understanding what was going on. So I think that we should probably work towards a version of Haskell which is easy for beginners to work with, so that they can get stuck into functional programming just like the rest of us did. And I feel that we've kind of left them behind, and it's not very fair.
But there was no question there, right?
No, that was straight opinion.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, being a beginner, I have some questions. You've spoken a lot about languages which managed to become popular despite a bad start or reboots or stuff like that. And also talked about going back to JavaScript after starting Haskell. So when I have a thought, which is when JavaScript started, it was pummeled a lot, and then there was a book which was JavaScript, the good parts. And yeah, being a beginner, I think it would be nice to have a book like Haskell, the non-mind-numbing parts. And maybe you have an opinion on what should be in this book. That's my question.
Well, does anybody have an answer for that? Yeah, I mean, everybody's allowed to have opinions.
But I'm already here.
Yeah, that's okay. No, that was a true question, I think.
It's difficult, right? If you learn most languages, you get that book that starts off with how do you print to the console, how do you read in, how do you read a file, how do you talk to a network. And traditionally, that's not the approach we take. We start with basic calculations, and then we introduce a couple of type classes and stuff like that. And actually, by the time you've written anything to the file, you're on like chapter 10 of the book. So it's why you're there, really. Are you learning Haskell because it kind of fits together in this beautiful, composable way? Or is it just because you want to get stuff done? And I don't think there's a book about just getting stuff done. I don't know whether there should be. That's definitely not an opinion I'm trying to put forward. I don't think we should write a book about, just put IO at the end of every signature. But that's effectively what every other language does, right? That's what we don't do. And if that's what you mean, if that's what it takes not to be mind-numbing, I think someone, well, for you, not my opinion, someone should write that book.
I think Real World Haskell was that book for a long time, but I mean it's quite out of date now. I mean it's bit rotted quite badly, and someone needs to write Real World Haskell too.
Are you volunteering?
I do academic Haskell.
So you literally stole what I wanted to say, which is that I feel that actually the foldable traversable thing is not so big of a deal for adoption, because I feel like if you've actually gotten the person to try out the Haskell language, you've gotten pretty far. The issue is that most people, when they try to solve a problem, they don't even think I should use Haskell to solve this problem, when there are already lots of languages which are marketed for solving specific problems, like Python or Ruby or Node and so forth. Haskell hasn't marketed itself for a particular problem application, so nobody even thinks to even try Haskell to solve the problem that they have at
Welcome
hand.
back, Gabriel.
So I think your point, Gabriel, is that if people are trying to learn Haskell, then they're already sort of somewhere down the route and they're already exploring functional languages and they're interested in that. And I think that's true for maybe a lot of people in this room when we're practitioners and we've already been programmers for a while and we pick this up as our second language, maybe our nth language. But for some of us, it's our job to teach this as the first language to people coming in. And I think that's often completely ignored online when we start doing polls asking people, hey guys, should we have this proposal or that proposal be accepted? Is this the way we should restructure our language? And the people voting for this, in the majority, are people who are engineers who understand the abstractions and who are like, yeah, sure, abstract away, let's do it. And I think we forget in these polls that there's a huge amount of people, year on year, coming into universities, learning Haskell for the first time as one of their first languages, and they don't get to vote because they don't even realize these votes are happening. And then suddenly we make decisions about libraries and how they should be designed, and we've forgotten about the beginners, and I think that's really worrying.
Yes. I mean, I have an opinion on this as well. So I think that if I think back all the years to when I learned Haskell, I had a brilliant course, so this shouldn't be in any way demeaning about that course. But it was essentially a one-term long course at the end of which the whole culmination of everything was the introduction of fold R. Right, so that was sort of the result of 3 months of hard work. And I actually thought at the time, oh, this is really impressive and very difficult, and I couldn't have understood it any earlier. And these days, when I teach Haskell, I teach it on the first day, and people understand it. And to a large extent, this is like, I mean, this is the mindset the lecturer sets out with. If you make something sound difficult, if you perhaps believe yourself that it is difficult to a certain extent, then your audience will also believe that it is more difficult. So whenever we're talking about these new things that are oh so difficult for the beginners, I'm always questioning in the back of my mind. I am not answering that question, but I certainly have the question, like, is this just another instance of like, we're used to it this way, so we think it's difficult, but our students might not actually have the same feeling if we just present it to them as if it's the most natural thing. Right?
I think a lot of people here are making the assumption that most people learn programming through the Royal Road, where they take essentially some computer science classes or programming classes at university. Most people are self-taught. Most people learn on Windows, in Notepad++, learning JavaScript using their browser to test their programs. Like, they don't actually even, maybe they're self-taught, they've never taken any formal courses. Those are the kind of people we should be reaching out to and getting them to use Haskell as their first choice for solving their problem, but we don't have that brand awareness or that social engagement that draws people into our community.
So, So I think this sort of raises the question of, should Haskell be a first language, and or more generally, should a functional language be someone's first language? I did not state my opinion either way.
Jenny, I'd like to get my beer, so I'll swap with you.
If you want. My opinion is yes.
So why do you think it raises the question then? Because I think most of us think that it, well, should be. Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, perhaps I'm wrong. I mean, who thinks that Haskell is a good first language to learn in the room? You don't all have to come here now, because and who thinks like it's explicitly not a good first choice? That would be interesting. So is any one of you willing to make that point loudly, or even here? Right? Oh, okay.
Well, I think the goal is what you're aiming for. So I learned Haskell because I was bored during winter recess, but there are plenty of people who want to have a decent job and they like stories of Silicon Valley startups, and Haskell is certainly not the right language to learn as a first language if you want to maximize employability. So you should go for whatever's hip at the moment, right? So take Java, which gets you enterprise jobs, take C++, JavaScript, whatever. But certainly not Haskell, because there's like a handful of startups even in San Francisco. And then there are other people who are just have spare time and they're interested in things. And for those, maybe Haskell is a very good introduction. And for me, for example, I used to be a physicist, and my programming was mostly hacking things together to do simulations. So programming was not something to do in its own right. It was made to get stuff done, you know. So if my program compiled and didn't completely crash, that was a good program, or Mathematica or something like that. So I guess asking whether Haskell is a good first language is maybe like asking whether Latin is, you know. If you want to travel a lot, Latin certainly isn't a good language, but if you want to understand, I don't know, history or something like that, maybe it's a good choice.
Seems a little unfair, because no one speaks Latin, not nowadays.
So?
That sort of well, the implication is that Haskell is only good for the academic sort of examination of things, which is what Latin is.
I see lots of hands. Just get the microphone. Oh yeah, you have it. All right. All right.
So this is not a question. This is just an opinion.
Then come here.
I'll state it from here and then I swap. I think if we want more people to get into Haskell as a first language, it has to be extremely easy to use for the first time. If you want to use JavaScript, all you have to do is save a file with Notepad and it works on your browser, which comes installed with your operating system. If you want to use Elm, which is becoming more and more popular, you go to a website and it just works. And with Haskell, we have very limited ways of doing this. And I don't think you can take a book, for instance, like Graham's, and run every single thing on any of the online Haskell interpreters that are available. We need to make it so easy to use that people will just go to a website or whatever and use it without having to install Stack or Cabal or deal with all of those issues. Also that would help more people get into Haskell as a first language, as opposed to coming from other languages, I think.
Okay. Did you want to?
I think one important thing to keep in mind is also that Haskell solves many problems that you maybe don't have if you haven't programmed before. So if you spend a week chasing a null in the wrong location, you know the value of just not having that, right? Or if you've never programmed any concurrent thing because, you know, I don't know, C++ makes it very hard, then you don't have this realization of, oh my God, this is really easy. So maybe Haskell also benefits a bit too much from doing certain things right that are like a first-time programmer just, you know, they don't know the issue or can't appreciate having a proper solution, because when you have a 100-line program, null is just not a problem.
Just come up here, Tony, and then you have a microphone. It didn't sound like a question to me.
Let's say it. Yeah, I didn't hear it.
Are you tired?
Yeah. No, I think we're...
All right. I believe that is... What is going on?
It's all right now.
You're the busboy now.
I believe that there is a natural thing for beings to evolve, and I believe that this is a kind of example where evolution takes place. We presume...
How do you mean?
You presume that we've become better when we've learned Haskell. And we assume better standards, like, you know, this concurrency issue or other things that Haskell makes like a natural thing to be solved. This is the standard. And beginning from there, a person can solve other more complex or maybe problems that are not approached by other languages. he can begin from there to try to solve them, to at least approach him. But a person dealing daily with problems like concurrency, how do I manage this thread and this thread, he doesn't even get enough time to consider other problems. He could have spent his talent or his mind on doing other things. That's my point.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, but then sometimes you look at, Rust, which is much younger than Haskell, and they have catchy slogans, and it sounds really silly, but I've been to a Rust conference, and they were really nice people, but they really liked saying stuff like fearless concurrency, and I was like, yeah, I know, we've had that before, and and Haskell is always like, yeah, we're a really good general purpose language and less bugs, and I don't know, it's just not as catchy maybe.
Haskell, it's good at everything.
Good luck.
I have a question. Is Haskell the best language for teaching the principles that Haskell is meant to embody? Because I think that's what the discussion before was about. We know it embodies very good principles, but there is doubt about whether it's the best way of getting those principles across. And there is a question mark at the end of that.
I think I'd agree with that. So
you can't agree with it because it's a question.
I agree with the sentiment that we should be asking the question, and I think that we need to think about what we're trying to teach when we're teaching functional programming. I do start a course on functional programming with a touch on lambda calculus, but I quickly move off that because I want the students to get stuck into programs that they can execute and do something with. And I think something like Haskell 98 is actually very good at that when the type system is very powerful, but not overly confusing. And I think we've kind of wandered into territory where the type system is even more powerful, but even more confusing. So I think there are different goals when we start teaching Haskell as to what we're trying to do. One reason why we teach it as the first course is because it offers a kind of even playing ground. So for students who have already programmed in some other language, they find Haskell confusing enough and a new different mindset that they are actually learning stuff, and that's good. And for students who have never done any program before, they find Haskell familiar enough because they've done maths, and for them it's something that they can just pick up and run with. So in the end, I think it works quite well as a starter language.
Let me rephrase the last 5 minutes of discussion in a very provocative way. Is it irresponsible to teach Haskell because it actually makes things too easy?
I miss hugs. I don't know what it is about it. It just feels slightly nicer than GHCI for like just learning the basics. Maybe it's just the name. Maybe you need a cute name.
No, I mean, you were saying something about employability, right? And actually, I mean, I've been thinking about this because I've never heard Haskellers complain about being unemployable. If anything, I've heard them about complaining there isn't a Haskell job in the city, I'm looking for one, or now that I've learned Haskell, I don't want to work with Java anymore. but I haven't heard that, like, I mean, learning Haskell has actually made me unemployable, or if only I had learned another language first. But on the other hand, I mean, what I said, I mean, there might be something, like, since Haskell is a high level of abstraction, and if you've got past the first hurdle, perhaps you're actually worse off because you're like less motivated to deal with the nitty-gritty details of the machine architecture and of certain aspects that you're confronted with day to day in other languages, and you're actually not well equipped for what's needed in the real world. So it might actually make you less employable in that sense. So I don't know.
I would have said that there's too much nitty-gritty in a Haskell. I feel like in Haskell, somewhere in Haskell is a more principled language trying to get out.
Okay, good.
I have an opinion actually about this.
Yeah.
That we should actually use PureScript to teach people because we.
That seems to become a popular opinion. Okay, do you?
Who's that?
I think David actually. You want to go into more detail on that?
Just to finish, yes. We have much more cleaner Prelude, which is much nicer, much more into mathematics, actually. It's much easier to install and work with it. It has much better support for IDEs. That actually works. Yeah, it's much more pleasant to do from the very beginning.
I think the microphone is back there. Yeah.
Say about learning Haskell as a first language. I do think that learning Haskell as a first language is good, although I don't have anything to compare it to because that's what I did. Hello? Okay. So I did have some things to say about learning Haskell as a first language, and I'll try to turn it into a question so I don't have to go sit up there. So for me, Haskell was my first language, and one of the things I like about learning it as a first programming language is that I actually find Haskell really, and I've written a blog post about this just recently, like the core idea of Haskell is actually something you can understand. You can understand all of Haskell in this very kind of coherent and elegant way, and I think that that is a really nice thing to be able to give to beginning programmers. So, for example, my other attempts, I didn't really try to learn programming before I came to Haskell, but since I learned Haskell, I thought, well, I should learn some of what other programmers do. So I took some classes for Rails programming, and I found that extremely opaque and hard to understand what was happening. There's some magic, right? You do things and suddenly you have a web app. But I didn't really understand what was happening. I've learned a bit of Python and a bit of JavaScript in kind of the same way. There were things that I didn't feel like fit together as a coherent, understandable system quite as well as Haskell. So I think that's a good thing to give to beginners. But in terms of employability and accessibility and why you should learn this if you've already got a job writing JavaScript or something, that's something that I've really struggled with because I don't have a good perspective on that. I do have a tendency, as much as I love Haskell, to tell people maybe Elm or PureScript is the right place for you to start. And I'm not sure if people, I guess, agree with that way of approaching it. But
there's a few things going on in your question. Okay, question, sure.
It's a question, yes.
The last thing that you said about recommending other languages, I agree with what she said, which is that maybe we should have something like Hugs, something that you can just install and it integrates the editor and the compiler or the interpreter into one tool. Sorry?
Haskell supports having an alternative prelude.
Yeah, exactly. We could have a simpler prelude that gives you nicer error messages too. And this is just a matter of building the tool, and we have all the underlying technology already. We don't need to recode everything. Also, about teaching Haskell as a first language, I think it may happen more in School of Mathematics, but I don't think we have enough examples of people learning Haskell as a first language to draw conclusions about whether it's a good idea or better for those people in the long run.
Okay.
I mean, I think I would agree with that, but like when we were talking about I wanted to say something when we were talking about the foldable traversable proposal, because for me that was just learning Haskell the way I did. I mean, the foldable instance for tuples and everything, that's just consistent with the functor instance, and so for me that was no big deal. It's not to say that I don't ever make mistakes with it, but the traversable instance on tuples I have found useful, and so I'd like to keep that around. But maybe this is getting back to what Andres was saying earlier about the kind of maybe some conflict between the desire for code generation and the wanting the type system to enforce correctness.
Okay. I would. Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I'm seeing people waiting here for a very, very long time. So we should give the word.
Okay. Sorry for changing topic a little. This is more an opinion question. What do you think, everyone, is the next big thing in Haskell, GHC, or kind of wish Julie were here, the community, and why, briefly?
Okay, I think that is a valid question.
Yeah, so I think it depends on whether we coordinate or not. And I think Haskell has a window of opportunity. And we are seeing many other languages emerging because we don't act quickly enough and we don't coordinate enough. And we might miss that window of opportunity if we don't work together. So the next big thing may arrive if we pull resources together and do bigger things, and we collaborate more. And instead of rolling our own library for yet another solution for something, we work with someone else. Otherwise, there might not be such a big thing in the Haskell community. I don't know.
I think the trouble is, and the reason you get so many different versions of a particular thing, is that because we come to it from a sort of perspective of wanting things to be principled, if we start with different principles, then it's difficult to actually work together on one unified thing. I think that's partially the reason for having like multiple versions of a particular, library, is that they're just built on different underlying concepts, and it's hard to unify them. But that doesn't mean that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. Just I think that's why that happens.
Okay, I think we actually should continue the discussion downstairs now at this point and have more beer and hopefully food. So thank you all very much, and thank the panelists.